It was the sound of the door slamming behind me that really brought the reality of my situation into sharp focus. I had been wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death for a crime I didn't commit. And then I found myself being locked in a cell completely made of concrete, small, windowless. I was just a young mother. I had 2 young children. My son was 9 years old. My daughter was 10 months old when this happened. And I was a hippie, peace and love kind of thing, and a vegetarian. So I couldn't imagine how anyone would think that I could do something like that. And I really didn't feel that anything in my life previously had prepared me for the situation that I was facing. I was kept in complete isolation in the women's maximum security prison in solitary confinement. No one was allowed to speak to me. I had no contact with the outside whatsoever, not even with the other prisoners. And the guards were under instructions not to speak to me. The only thing in my cell was a toilet and sink combination, which was about 6 steps from the door to the toilet. And there was a thin metal shelf with a thin mattress, and that was my bed. And that was all there was in the cell, except for a Bible and a law book. Now, the law book was basically useless to me at that point, and the Bible was a book of wisdom, but at that point in time, I really wasn't sure if I believed in God anymore, because I couldn't imagine how God could let this happen to me and my whole family. But I consulted the Bible every once in a while. In fact, daily, I opened it up just to any page and to see what it had to say to me, and it always seemed to have some wisdom for me. But mostly, I just paced back and forth in my cell in anger, fear, confusion, trying to understand what had happened to me. Until one day, something that I read in the Bible, and I wish I had made a note of what it was, but something that I read in the Bible told me that they don't really get to say when I die, that that's not really up to them, even though they had all the power and they had written it. In fact, the judge had sat before me and pronounced that my sentence, saying that I was to have 2,400 volts of electricity pass through my body until I was pronounced dead. But I realized that until they figured out they made a mistake and let me go home to my children, or they did take my life for some karmic reason that I didn't understand, that my life still belonged to me, and I could still decide how it would be until that time. Now, they could keep me there. They could lock me up in that little cell, and I couldn't be where I wanted to be, with whom I wanted to be. But within the space that was allocated to me, my little world, I could decide. And so I decided that I didn't have to live the rest of my life, be it long or be it short, in fear and misery and anger. Then instead, I could use the time that I had there to work on my spiritual self. After all, for the first time in my life, I had servants. They cooked for me. They brought me my food. They did my dishes. They did my laundry. I didn't have to work. I had no bills to pay. So I decided it was a good opportunity. You see, every challenge is actually an opportunity. And so once I shifted my perspective, instead of seeing it as a time when I was to sit there and await my death by execution, it was a time when I could do all those things that I didn't have time for while I was taking care of my family. And so I turned my cell into a sanctuary, and I started doing my spiritual work. I decided, first of all, that I had a choice between hope and hopelessness, and I much preferred believing in hope. And so I decided that there had to be God after all, because without God, it really was pretty hopeless. And so we had a serious discussion. And then I decided that my days would be filled with prayer, yoga, and meditation. And I started doing my yoga, prayer, and meditation, and my world was transformed. Actually, I think I learned more about freedom while I was sentenced to death than I had ever known before, because I experienced myself now as a spirit on my journey here, rather than as a victim and a poor, helpless lump of flesh that they could keep locked up. It was true that I couldn't leave, but my spirit was free. And so I spent the next 5 years in solitary confinement, working on my spiritual self. And then after 5 years, my first appeal came up, and my sentence was changed from death to life. And that was only because in my trial, there was one juror who just refused to be bullied into agreeing with everyone else to sentence me to death. I guess he realized that he had a choice too. And as a result of his brave stand for what he believed in, my sentence was changed. So I then entered the prison population, which was another big transition to go through. I was actually the happiest prisoner in the prison because I could talk to people, and I could eat with people, and I could go outside in the sun, and even sometimes at night, and see the stars. And my life improved quite a bit. I was allowed phone calls home, and I could talk to my children. My daughter didn't even know I was her mother, except for the fact that my parents showed her a picture and said, "You see, that's your mommy." And then when they'd bring her to visit me, they'd show her the picture and point to me, and that's the only way she knew I was her mother. And so I was given a job in the prison. Actually, in the beginning, they gave me a job in the kitchen and gave me a knife to chop carrots. And I thought, how did I go from being the most notorious prisoner one day to being given a knife and told to cut carrots the next? The whole experience was quite extraordinary and surreal. And so I started, now my husband Jesse, he was also sentenced to death at the time, and his sentence never changed. But at least now I could, I got art supplies in, and I was able to paint pictures for him and send him pictures and send my children drawings. And about a year after my sentence was changed from death to life, my parents decided that they could take a vacation, because up until then, they could only come 4 times a year during school holidays. And up until then, they were worried about my possible execution. But since they didn't have to worry about that anymore, they decided that they could take a vacation, and they decided to go to Las Vegas. My father would gamble, my mother would read the newspaper. And so, unfortunately, on the way, the plane crashed, and they were killed. And that was the worst day of my life. And I became an orphan, and my children became orphans as well, again. And they went into care. And after about a year and a half, the people taking care of my daughter decided that it was too stressful for them to continue to bring her to visit me. And so I wasn't able to see her anymore. And my son, after about a year, went off on his own, and I lost touch with him for a couple of years as well. All I could do was pray that they'd be okay and send them my love and my energy. I would spend another 12 years in the prison population. And in the 15th year of our incarceration, Jesse received his 3rd death warrant, which normally is fatal, and in his case it was, and he was put in the electric chair, and the chair malfunctioned, and instead of dying, he caught fire. And the witnesses said that flames shot from his head and smoke came out of his ears, and he struggled against the restraints until after 3 times doing this to him. He was pronounced dead by a doctor who participates in the execution. A doctor participates in every execution to pronounce the person dead. And when our daughter heard what happened to her father, she was so emotionally upset. As you can imagine, she was sent away to a school for children with emotional and behavioral problems. My son attended the funeral and in my place put a poem into the box with him because I wasn't allowed, of course. And about 2.5 years after Jesse's execution, we were finally able to win my final appeal with the help of lawyers who worked for free all those years because they believed in me, and friends who never gave up believing that I was innocent. And so I was finally, after 17 years, I was released. All I had in the whole world was a little cardboard box of all my possessions in the world. I had no money, I had no home, I had no job. And people think that when you're released that your troubles are over. But really a whole new set of troubles is just beginning. Because you see, when I went to prison, I was about 27 years old, a mother, a wife, and a daughter. And when I came out of prison, I was a widow and an orphan and a grandmother. Because my son, who was 9 when I went in, had a 3.5-year-old daughter of his own. I was 45 years old. Now, no one was going to hire me. 45 years old with my work record. I worked in the kitchen in the prison chopping. So at first, I was incapable of finding my way around the world by myself. My friends took me to see my son. I met my granddaughter for the first time, and she said, she was 3.5. She said to me, "Grandma, I know why you never came to visit me, because you were lost." And I said, "Yes, Claudia, I was, but I will never be lost again." And then I went to visit my daughter in the school where she was, and I could only hope that her curiosity would lead her to me eventually. And then I went with my friends to live in Los Angeles. My favorite thing, I must tell you, my favorite thing in the whole world was the ATM machine. You put the little plastic card in, and it spits out money. It was like the best. But then the problem was that I didn't fit in at all. I had no way to connect with people. So, and no one would hire me, so the only thing I could figure to do was to teach yoga. Yoga is what got me through all the worst times in my life, so I figured yoga would help me through this too, because you see, I felt that it was so important for me to share the methods that had helped me through all these difficult times. So I started teaching yoga and meditation, and I kept up my prayers, of course. But I found that at first, you see, I thought that people couldn't relate to me and my experience. But then I found out that people outside have lots of reasons to be angry too. And then there are lots of forms of injustice that people face in their everyday lives. So I thought that yoga would help them like it helped me to get rid of the anger. But it wasn't good enough to just connect with people because of anger. And I tried finding people who did meditation. I found a little Zen meditation center in Los Angeles, and I found that I could make connections on that level. But there was a step still that I had to do, and that was forgiveness. Because you see, without forgiveness, I wouldn't have been able to make room inside myself to fill my new life with love and happiness. And that's what I decided I wanted, because again, I had a choice. I could go on with the rest of my life being a victim of injustice and feeling sorry for myself, justifiably. Or I could decide that I wanted to have a happy and beautiful life. And the only way for me to do that was to forgive those that were connected to me through this anger. And so I used meditation, yoga, and prayer to do that. And I found that little by little, I was able to fill my life with more and more happiness. And then my children came to me. First, my daughter came when she was released from that school. And we got an apartment together. And then after a while, my son's marriage broke up, and he came with his daughter to live with us. And so we all became a family again. It was great, except for now I was the littlest one, because even my granddaughter was bigger than me. And so we knew that we couldn't go back. It's impossible. You can't go back. I couldn't go back and tie their shoes and go to their school graduation and share the Christmases with them that I had missed. But what I could do was I could leave them a legacy of hope and of joy. But in order to do that, I had to teach them about forgiveness as well, because their lives had been destroyed. They had suffered because of what happened too, and they were angry. And so I shared my methods and my tools, and I taught them forgiveness. And as a result, my daughter went on to meet a man and have children of her own, and she gave to them the childhood that she wished she had had. And my son went on and found love on the internet, actually. He met a lady in a chat room, and he ended up moving in with her and combining their families, and he has a happy life. And that left me free to follow my path again. And I started speaking out against the death penalty and for human rights. And I found myself invited to Ireland, where I met my now husband, Peter Pringle, who also was wrongly convicted and sentenced to death for a crime he didn't commit. And together, we became part of each other's healing. And now we have started what we call the Sunny Center, where we host people in our home who were wrongly convicted, some of them sentenced to death and some not. And not just from America and Ireland, but from all over the world, because injustice happens everywhere and forgiveness is needed everywhere. So we teach them our tools, and we let them know that hope is a lot better than hopelessness. And if you'd like to have a beautiful and happy life, then you'd forgive and fill yourself with love. And so using forgiveness as the doorway, peace becomes the way, and love becomes the answer. And thank you very much. Thank you.